In the gilded corridors of Valdoria Palace, where whispers carry more weight than swords, and loyalty can be bought with a single glance, Captain Marcus Thornfield had served the crown for 15 years without question. He had protected kings, defended queens, and sworn sacred oaths written in blood and honor. But some betrayals cut deeper than any blade, and some secrets demand a choice between duty and conscience. When the most innocent member of the royal family becomes a pawn in a game she's too young to understand, one man's unwavering sense of justice will shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is knowing when to walk away. The morning sun cast long shadows through the towering windows of Valdoria Palace as Captain Marcus Thornfield adjusted his ceremonial sword and straightened the golden braids adorning his uniform. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet authority that came from years of service to the crown, his weathered face bearing the subtle scars of a man who had seen both the beauty and brutality of royal life. The palace corridors buzzed with their usual symphony of clicking heels, rustling silk, and hushed conversations, but today something felt different. Marcus had been summoned to Queen Regent Isabella's private chambers, an unusual request that set his instincts on high alert. As the head of the Royal Guard's elite protection unit, he typically received his orders through official channels, not through cryptic handwritten notes delivered by nervous-looking servants. The message had been simple. Your presence is required in the blue drawing room at precisely 9 o'clock. Come alone. Tell no one. It was signed with the Queen Regent's personal seal, the one reserved for matters of utmost secrecy. The blue drawing room was aptly named, its walls adorned with azure silk wallpaper imported from distant lands and paintings depicting centuries of Valdoria nobility. Queen Regent Isabella stood with her back to the door, gazing out at the palace gardens where gardeners tended to roses that would soon bloom in preparation for the upcoming royal summer festival. She was a woman of 45, elegant and calculating, who had assumed power after her husband King Frederick's untimely death 3 years prior. Her auburn hair was pulled back in an elaborate style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face, and she wore a deep emerald dress that spoke of both wealth and authority. "Captain Thornfield," she said without turning around, her voice carrying the cultured accent of the aristocracy. "Thank you for coming so promptly. I trust you found my request intriguing." Marcus bowed formally, though she couldn't see the gesture. "Your Majesty, I serve at your pleasure. Though I must admit, the secrecy is unusual." Isabella finally turned, revealing eyes the color of winter ice and a smile that never quite reached them. "Indeed it is, Captain. But what I'm about to discuss with you requires the utmost discretion. It concerns Princess Charlotte." The mention of a young princess immediately sharpened Marcus's attention. Charlotte was only 12 years old, the daughter of the late King Frederick and his first wife, who had died in childbirth. She was beloved by the people of Valdoria, known for her kindness, intelligence, and the genuine warmth she showed to everyone from visiting dignitaries to palace servants. Marcus had personally overseen her protection detail for the past 2 years, and had grown genuinely fond of the spirited young royal who insisted on learning the names of every guard and asked endless questions about their families. "Is the princess in danger, Your Majesty?" Marcus asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his sword hilt. "In a manner of speaking, yes," Isabella replied, moving to an ornate writing desk and picking up a leather-bound folder. "But not in the way you might think. You see, Captain, Princess Charlotte has become problematic." The word hung in the air like a blade suspended by a thread. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his professional composure. "Problematic how, Your Majesty?" Isabella opened the folder and began pacing slowly around the room, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. "The princess has been asking questions. Uncomfortable questions about palace finances, about certain reorganizations I've implemented since assuming the regency. She's also been spending far too much time in the company of servants and common folk, filling her head with ideas about social justice and reform that are entirely inappropriate for someone of her station." Marcus listened carefully, reading between the lines of what the Queen Regent was really saying. Charlotte's curiosity and compassion, the very qualities that made her so beloved, were being framed as character flaws. She's an intelligent young woman, Your Majesty. Surely her interest in the kingdom's welfare is admirable. Her interest, Isabella said sharply, is becoming interference. Just last week, she questioned why we've reduced funding for the orphanages while increasing expenditures for the upcoming summer festivities. She's been asking the kitchen staff about their working conditions and has even suggested that palace servants should receive better wages. The Queen Regent's voice took on a tone of barely contained irritation. These are not appropriate concerns for a future queen. The pieces began falling into place in Marcus's mind. Charlotte's questions weren't random curiosity. They were the result of a sharp mind beginning to notice inconsistencies and injustices within the palace walls. And those questions were clearly making Isabella uncomfortable. "What exactly are you asking of me, Your Majesty?" Marcus asked carefully. Isabella stopped pacing and fixed him with her cold stare. "I need you to implement certain restrictions on Princess Charlotte's movements and interactions. She's to be confined to the royal wing of the palace. No more wandering through the servant quarters, no more unsupervised conversations with staff members, and absolutely no access to any financial documents or administrative meetings. Her education will also be refocused on more suitable subjects for a young lady of her position." The request hit Marcus like a physical blow. What Isabella was describing wasn't protection. It was imprisonment. She wanted to isolate a 12-year-old girl from the world beyond the palace walls, to stifle her natural curiosity and compassion before they could threaten the Queen Regent's carefully constructed authority. "Your Majesty," Marcus said slowly. "With respect, these restrictions seem quite severe for a child who has done nothing wrong. Princess Charlotte has always been well-behaved, and Princess Charlotte," Isabella interrupted, "is the daughter of a king and must learn to act accordingly. Her current behavior is unbecoming of her station and potentially dangerous to the stability of the crown." "I'm not asking for your opinion on the matter, Captain. I'm giving you an order." Marcus felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. In 15 years of service, he had followed orders without question, even when they required him to risk his own life. But this was different. This wasn't about protecting the royal family. It was about protecting one royal from another. The oath he had sworn was to defend the crown and its rightful heirs, not to enable the suppression of an innocent child. "There's more," Isabella continued, returning to her desk and pulling out an official-looking document. "Given the sensitive nature of Princess Charlotte's situation, I'm also implementing changes to her security detail. Several of her current guards have become too familiar with her. They'll be reassigned to other duties. You'll select new guards who understand the importance of maintaining proper boundaries." The implication was clear. Isabella wanted guards who would report on Charlotte rather than protect her, men who would see her as a potential threat rather than a child under their care. Marcus thought of his current team, good men who had served faithfully and who genuinely cared about Charlotte's well-being. They were being punished for the crime of treating her with humanity. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, struggling to keep his voice level, "may I ask what has prompted these sudden changes? Has Princess Charlotte done something specific to warrant such measures?" Isabella's smile returned, but it was sharper now, like a blade barely concealed beneath velvet. "Let me be very clear, Captain Thornfield. There are forces at work in this kingdom that seek to undermine the stability we've worked so hard to achieve. Princess Charlotte, whether she realizes it or not, has become a symbol for those who would challenge the natural order of things. Her questions, her interactions with the common people, her naive idealism. These things are being watched and potentially exploited by those who would use her innocence for their own political purposes." Marcus understood now. It wasn't really about Charlotte's questions or her kindness to the servants. It was about power and control. Isabella had consolidated her authority as Queen Regent, but Charlotte represented the legitimate line of succession. In 5 years, when Charlotte reached her majority, she would have a legal claim to challenge Isabella's decisions or even to assume the throne herself. By isolating her now, by cutting off her connections to the people and limiting her knowledge of how the kingdom actually functioned, Isabella was ensuring that Charlotte would remain controllable and dependent. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "And if I refuse to implement these measures?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Isabella's mask of regal composure slipped slightly, revealing the steel beneath. "I would find such refusal disappointing, Captain. You've served this crown faithfully for many years. It would be tragic if questions arose about your loyalty or competence. There are many ambitious young officers who would be eager to take your position." The threat was unmistakable. Comply or face disgrace, demotion, or worse. Marcus had seen what happened to those who fell out of favor with the Queen Regent. They disappeared from court, their reputations destroyed by whispered accusations of corruption or incompetence. Some found themselves facing trumped-up charges that conveniently removed them from positions where they might cause trouble. Marcus straightened his shoulders, drawing upon every ounce of military bearing he possessed. "Your Majesty, I need time to consider how best to implement these changes. Such measures will require careful planning to ensure they're carried out properly." Isabella studied him for a long moment, her ice-blue eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. "Of course, Captain. I wouldn't expect anything less than your usual thoroughness. However, I trust you understand the urgency of the situation. I'll expect to see the new security protocols in place by the end of the week." "Understood, Your Majesty." "Excellent. One more thing, Captain. This conversation never happened. The official record will show that these security changes are being implemented as part of routine protocol updates. Anyone who suggests otherwise would be spreading dangerous rumors that could damage the crown's reputation." Marcus bowed formally. "Of course, Your Majesty." As he left the blue drawing room, Marcus felt as though the weight of the entire palace was pressing down on his shoulders. The corridors that had been his home for 15 years now felt like a maze designed to trap him. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family. But what happened when members of that family threatened each other? What happened when duty to the crown conflicted with basic human decency? He made his way back to his office in the guard quarters, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just heard. The Queen Regent's orders weren't just morally questionable, they were potentially illegal. Princess Charlotte was the legitimate heir to the throne, and Isabella's attempts to isolate and control her could be seen as a form of usurpation. But proving such accusations would be nearly impossible, and attempting to do so would almost certainly result in his own destruction. Marcus sat at his desk and pulled out the detailed security files for Princess Charlotte's detail. Each of his men was listed with their background, their years of service, and their performance evaluations. They were good men, soldiers who had proven their loyalty and dedication countless times. Now he was being asked to destroy their careers to serve Isabella's paranoid ambitions. He thought about Charlotte herself, remembering the last time he had spoken with her just days ago. She had been in the palace library, reading a book about the history of Aldoria's agricultural policies, of all things. When he had checked on her security, she had looked up with those bright, curious eyes and asked him if he knew why so many farmers had been struggling recently. She had shown him charts and graphs she had copied from various books, trying to understand the connection between policy changes and economic hardship. At 12 years old, Princess Charlotte was already demonstrating more genuine concern for her future subjects than many adult rulers ever showed. She was exactly the kind of leader Valdoria needed, someone who combined royal authority with authentic compassion. And Isabella wanted to crush that spark before it could grow into something that might challenge her own power. Marcus made his decision with the sudden clarity that sometimes comes in moments of crisis. He could not, and would not carry out Isabella's orders. The question now was how to protect Charlotte without destroying himself and his men in the process. He needed allies, people who shared his concerns about the direction the kingdom was heading. But in a palace where loyalty was currency, and betrayal was always just a whispered conversation away. Finding those allies would be dangerous. The sound of boots in the corridor outside his office interrupted his thoughts. Lieutenant James Morrison appeared in the doorway. His young face creased with concern. "Captain, sir, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Everything all right." Marcus studied his second-in-command, a man he had trained personally and come to trust implicitly. Morrison was 28, the son of a blacksmith who had worked his way up through the ranks through sheer determination and natural ability. He was also one of Charlotte's favorite guards, the one she always asked about his family, and who had taught her basic swordsmanship despite it being technically against protocol. "James," Marcus said slowly, "if you had to choose between following orders and doing what's right, what would you do?" Morrison's expression grew serious. "That would depend on the orders, sir. But I like to think I'd choose what's right, regardless of the consequences." Marcus nodded, feeling a small spark of hope. Perhaps he wasn't as alone as he had feared. The next morning brought an unexpected complication that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about the situation. He was reviewing security schedules when a soft knock came at his office door. To his surprise, Princess Charlotte herself stood in the hallway, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the elderly head governess who had been Charlotte's primary tutor and companion since her father's death. Mrs. Hartwell was a woman of 62 with silver hair, pulled back in a neat bun, and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. She had served the royal family for over 30 years and commanded respect throughout the palace for her wisdom and unwavering dedication to her charges. Her presence with Charlotte suggested this wasn't a casual visit. "Captain Thornfield," Charlotte said with the formal politeness she had been taught. "May we speak with you privately?" "Mrs. Hartwell says it's very important." Marcus immediately stood and bowed. "Of course, Your Highness. Please come in." He gestured for them to sit in the two chairs facing his desk while he closed the door and ensured they wouldn't be overheard. Charlotte looked unusually serious for a 12-year-old. Her dark hair braided simply and her blue dress modest compared to her usual royal attire. There was something in her expression that reminded Marcus powerfully of her late father, a combination of determination and compassion that had made King Frederick beloved by his people. "Mrs. Hartwell spoke first, her voice low but clear. "Captain, we need your help. Princess Charlotte has discovered something that we believe you should know about, but we don't know who else we can trust." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of something?" Charlotte reached into a small leather satchel she was carrying and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in her neat handwriting. "I've been copying numbers from documents I found in Queen Isabella's study. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I heard raised voices, and I was worried someone might be hurt." She spread the papers on Marcus's desk, revealing columns of figures, dates, and what appeared to be financial calculations. "I don't understand all of it, but Mrs. Hartwell does. She used to help my father with correspondence, so she knows about palace finances." Mrs. Hartwell leaned forward, pointing to specific entries on the pages. "Captain, these documents show systematic diversion of funds from essential services. Money allocated for orphanages, hospitals, and infrastructure maintenance is being redirected to private accounts. But that's not the worst part." She pulled out another sheet, this one containing what appeared to be correspondence between Isabella and various nobles. "The Queen Regent has been selling royal lands and properties to foreign investors. Lands that have been the royal family for generations are being transferred to buyers from neighboring kingdoms. The sale proceeds aren't going into the royal treasury. They're disappearing entirely." Marcus studied the documents, his military training helping him quickly identify patterns and connections. The scope of what Charlotte had discovered was staggering. This wasn't simple embezzlement. It was the systematic dismantling of Valdoria's resources and sovereignty. "How did you obtain these documents?" Marcus asked carefully. Charlotte looked down at her hands. "I know I shouldn't have been in the Queen's study, but I heard her arguing with someone about money. When I listened at the door, I heard my name mentioned and something about making sure I never found out about the arrangement she had made. I got scared and hid in the room when they left. That's when I saw all the papers on her desk. Mrs. Hartwell placed a protective hand on Charlotte's shoulder. The child was frightened, Captain. She came to me because she didn't understand what she had seen, but she knew it was important. When I reviewed what she had copied, I realized we were looking at evidence of treason. The word hung in the air like a sword poised to fall. Treason. The charge carried a death sentence, but proving it against a queen regent would require evidence so overwhelming that even her supporters couldn't deny it. And even then, bringing such accusations would be incredibly dangerous. There's more, Charlotte said quietly. Yesterday, Queen Isabella told me that I would be spending less time in the palace. She said I was going to have special tutoring in the East Wing, away from everyone else. She said it was for my own good, but she had this look in her eyes that scared me. Marcus's blood ran cold. So Isabella was moving ahead with her plans even faster than he had expected. This special tutoring was clearly the beginning of Charlotte's isolation, the first step in removing her from any position where she might threaten Isabella's power. Captain, Mrs. Hartwell said, "We need to know if we can trust you. Princess Charlotte's life may depend on it." The directness of the statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. What do you mean, her life? Charlotte looked up at him with eyes far too serious for a 12-year-old. Mrs. Hartwell thinks Queen Isabella might try to hurt me. Not directly, but maybe by making sure I have an accident or get sick or just disappear. The coldness in Marcus's stomach spread throughout his entire body. He had been thinking in terms of political maneuvering and power struggles, but Mrs. Hartwell was right to consider more extreme possibilities. If Isabella was embezzling royal funds and selling off the kingdom's assets, she couldn't afford to have Charlotte reach her majority and potentially investigate or reverse those decisions. A dead heir was much more convenient than a living one who might ask inconvenient questions. Mrs. Hartwell, Marcus said carefully, "What evidence do you have for such suspicions?" The elderly governess reached into her own bag and pulled out a small glass vial containing traces of white powder. This was found in Princess Charlotte's tea yesterday evening. I had it tested by Dr. Morrison in the village. He's an old friend who I knew would be discreet. The powder contains trace amounts of nightshade. Not enough to kill, but enough to cause weakness, confusion, and memory problems over time. Marcus felt the world shift around him. Attempted poisoning of a royal heir was an act of war against the crown itself. You're certain of this? Dr. Morrison confirmed it twice. Someone has been slowly poisoning Princess Charlotte, likely for weeks or even months. It would explain her recent fatigue and the headaches she's been experiencing. Charlotte nodded solemnly. I thought I was just tired from studying, but Mrs. Hartwell noticed I was becoming forgetful and dizzy. She's been watching my food and drinks ever since. The scope of Isabella's plot was becoming clear now. The financial crimes were bad enough, but the systematic poisoning of Charlotte suggested a long-term plan to eliminate the legitimate heir while making it appear natural. A slow-acting poison would avoid suspicion while gradually weakening Charlotte until her eventual death could be attributed to illness or accident. Marcus made his decision with crystal clarity. Mrs. Hartwell, Princess Charlotte, you have my complete loyalty and protection. What Queen Isabella is doing amounts to treason and attempted murder. We need to stop her, but we also need to keep you both safe while we gather enough evidence to present to the Royal Council. Mrs. Hartwell nodded with obvious relief. Thank you, Captain. I hope we could count on you. What can I do to help? Charlotte asked, surprising Marcus with her determination rather than fear. The most important thing is keeping you alive and safe, Marcus replied. That means we need to change your routines completely. Mrs. Hartwell, from now on, no food or drink reaches Princess Charlotte unless it comes directly from sources we can verify. We'll also need to move her to secure quarters where we can control access. Charlotte frowned. But won't Queen Isabella notice if I suddenly change everything? She's already suspicious about my questions. Marcus had been thinking about this problem since his meeting with Isabella the day before. Actually, that might work in our favor. The Queen Regent has ordered me to implement new security protocols for you anyway. I can use those orders as cover for moving you to safer accommodations and controlling your environment more strictly." Mrs. Hartwell looked puzzled. The Queen Regent ordered increased security? What? Marcus explained Isabella's stated concerns about Charlotte's behavior and the restrictions she wanted implemented. As he spoke, he watched understanding dawn on both women's faces. "She's not trying to protect me," Charlotte said quietly. "She's trying to isolate me, so no one will notice when I get sicker." "Exactly. But we can turn her own orders against her. I'll implement the security changes, but I'll staff your detail with guards I know we can trust. Instead of restricting your access to information, we'll use the increased security to investigate Isabella's activities more thoroughly." Mrs. Hartwell leaned forward. "What about the documents Charlotte found? Should we try to get the originals?" Marcus shook his head. "Too dangerous. Isabella will have noticed if anything is missing, and trying to access her private study again would put Charlotte at even greater risk. But what we have here is enough to begin building a case. The key is finding allies within the royal council who aren't already under Isabella's influence." Charlotte had been listening intently to the adult conversation, but now she spoke up with a question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Captain Thornfield, what happens if we can't stop her? What if Queen Isabella succeeds in getting rid of me?" The question hung in the air like a death knell. Marcus looked at this brave, intelligent young woman who should have been worrying about lessons and friendships instead of poison and political murder. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a mantle of lead. "That won't happen," he said firmly. "I give you my word as a soldier and as a man. Queen Isabella will not succeed." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew that keeping that promise would require everything he had learned in 15 years of service, and more courage than he had ever needed before. They were up against an enemy who controlled the palace, commanded vast resources, and had already demonstrated a willingness to murder a child to achieve her goals. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside made all three of them freeze. Marcus quickly gathered the documents Charlotte had brought and locked them in his personal safe while Mrs. Hartwell and Charlotte composed themselves. Lieutenant Morrison appeared in the doorway, his expression apologetic. "Captain, sorry to interrupt, but Queen Isabella's secretary is looking for Princess Charlotte. Apparently she's expected for afternoon lessons." Charlotte stood with the poise of someone far older than her years. "Thank you, Lieutenant Morrison. I'll go immediately." As she prepared to leave, she turned back to Marcus. "Captain, will you be implementing those new security measures we discussed?" Marcus understood the coded language. "Yes, Your Highness. Starting immediately. Lieutenant Morrison will brief you on the changes within the hour." After Charlotte and Mrs. Hartwell left, Marcus turned to Morrison with a grim expression. "James, I need to know if you're ready for the most important assignment of your career. What I'm about to ask of you could cost us both everything." Morrison straightened to attention. "What do you need, sir?" "I need you to help me save Princess Charlotte's life, and probably the kingdom along with it." The young lieutenant's eyes widened, but his voice remained steady. "Tell me what you need me to do." Marcus outlined the basics of the situation, watching Morrison's expression grow increasingly serious as the implications became clear. When he finished, Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Sir," Morrison finally said, "if what you're telling me is true, then Queen Isabella isn't just committing treason against the crown. She's betraying everything this kingdom stands for. That's exactly what she's doing. The question is, are you willing to risk everything to stop her?" Morrison's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, sir. Absolutely." Marcus felt the first glimmer of hope since this nightmare had begun. With Mrs. Hartwell's wisdom, Charlotte's courage, and Morrison's loyalty, they might actually have a chance. But time was running out, and Isabella's plans were already in motion. The next few days would determine whether Valdoria remained a kingdom or became the personal property of a traitor who had murdered her way to power. The real battle was just beginning. The implementation of the new security protocols provided the perfect cover for Marcus's real mission. Over the next 3 days, he carefully restructured Charlotte's protection detail, replacing Isabella's potential spies with guards he had personally vetted over years of service. Each man was approached individually and sworn to secrecy before being briefed on the true nature of their assignment. Sergeant David Blackwood, a grizzled veteran of 23 years, was the first to join their inner circle. When Marcus explained the situation in his private quarters away from any possibility of surveillance, Blackwood's weathered face grew dark with anger. "Captain, I've served 3 monarchs in my time, and I've never seen anything like this. To poison a child, it's beyond comprehension." He paused, struggling with his emotions. "My own daughter is about Princess Charlotte's age. If someone tried to hurt her..." Corporal Thomas Reed, barely 25, but already showing the keen instincts of a natural soldier, was equally committed. "Sir, I grew up in the villages. My family depends on the Crown's protection and the services the palace provides. If Queen Isabella is stealing money meant for hospitals and orphanages, she's hurting people I care about." Within days, Marcus had assembled a team of 8 guards who formed Charlotte's new inner security circle. Each man understood that they weren't just protecting a princess. They were protecting the future of Valdoria itself. The security changes also allowed Marcus to move Charlotte to different quarters within the palace. Instead of her previous rooms in the central royal wing, she was relocated to a suite in the North Tower that had been used by visiting dignitaries. The location offered several advantages. It was more isolated, making it harder for unauthorized persons to approach. It had only 2 entrances, both easily monitored, and it included a private dining area where Charlotte's food could be prepared and served by trusted staff. Mrs. Hartwell took charge of the food security operation with military precision. She identified 3 kitchen staff members who had served the royal family for decades and could be trusted absolutely. All of Charlotte's meals were prepared separately, using ingredients that Mrs. Hartwell personally selected and supervised. Even the water Charlotte drank was drawn from a private well that only the trusted staff could access. The poisoning attempts stopped immediately, confirming their suspicions about the source. Within a week, Charlotte's energy levels improved dramatically, her headaches disappeared, and her mental clarity returned to normal. The change was so noticeable that Isabella herself commented on it during one of Charlotte's mandatory formal dinners. "You're looking much better, my dear," Isabella said with what appeared to be genuine concern, but struck Marcus as disappointment. "I was worried about your health. Perhaps the reduced stress of your new routine is helping." Charlotte, coached by Mrs. Hartwell, and Marcus played her role perfectly. "Yes, Aunt Isabella. The new security arrangements make me feel much safer, and having fewer distractions helps me focus on my studies." But while they had successfully protected Charlotte from immediate harm, Marcus knew they were far from safe. Isabella was too intelligent not to notice that her poisoning campaign had failed, and she would undoubtedly devise new methods of achieving her goals. Their window for gathering evidence and building a case was rapidly closing. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Edmund Whitmore, the palace physician, approached Marcus privately with information that changed everything they thought they knew about Isabella's plans. Dr. Whitmore was a man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and the careful manner of someone accustomed to dealing with royal secrets. He had served the palace for over 20 years and had been King Frederick's personal physician. Marcus had always respected him as a man of integrity, but he was surprised when the doctor requested a private meeting. "Captain Thornfield," Dr. Whitmore began nervously, "I need to speak with you about Princess Charlotte's health, but what I have to say must remain absolutely confidential." Marcus immediately thought about the poisoning, wondering if the doctor had discovered evidence of the nightshade. "Of course, doctor. What concerns you? It's not about her current condition, which has improved remarkably in recent days. It's about something Queen Isabella asked me to prepare." Dr. Whitmore pulled out a small leather journal and opened it to a specific page. 3 weeks ago, the Queen Regent ordered me to develop a treatment protocol for a rare hereditary condition that she claimed Princess Charlotte might have inherited from her late mother. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of condition?" According to Queen Isabella, there's a family history of sudden cardiac episodes in young women. She provided me with falsified medical records claiming that Charlotte's mother had experienced similar symptoms before her death in childbirth. Dr. Whitmore's hands were shaking slightly as he spoke. She asked me to prepare medications that could be administered quickly if Princess Charlotte showed signs of cardiac distress. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. You're saying she wanted you to prepare drugs that could cause a heart attack? The medications she requested are legitimate cardiac treatments, but if administered to someone with a healthy heart, they could indeed cause fatal arrhythmias. She specifically asked for injectable forms that would act quickly. Dr. Whitmore closed his journal and looked directly at Marcus. Captain, I've been a physician for over 30 years. I know the difference between legitimate medical preparation and premeditation for murder. Marcus felt the final pieces of Isabella's plan falling into place. The poisoning campaign had been designed to weaken Charlotte gradually, but when that failed, Isabella was preparing to stage a sudden cardiac emergency that would appear natural and unavoidable. A young woman with a family history of heart problems dying suddenly would be tragic but not suspicious, especially if the palace physician confirmed the hereditary condition and administered the appropriate emergency treatments. Doctor, did you prepare the medication she requested? Dr. Whitmore nodded reluctantly. I had no choice. Refusing would have aroused suspicion and possibly put me in danger. But I've kept detailed records of everything she asked for, including her specific instructions about dosages and timing. Do you still have access to these medications? Yes, but Queen Isabella has been asking about them frequently. I believe she's planning to use them soon. Dr. Whitmore paused, then added quietly, Captain, there's something else. Yesterday, Queen Isabella asked me to examine Princess Charlotte and provide a health assessment. She specifically wanted me to document any signs of cardiac irregularity or family history factors that might predispose her to sudden episodes. Marcus understood immediately. Isabella was building the medical foundation for Charlotte's murder, creating documentation that would support the story of a tragic but natural death. When Charlotte suddenly suffered a cardiac emergency, Dr. Whitmore's records would show that the condition had been identified and monitored, making the death appear both predictable and unavoidable. Doctor, I need you to understand that Princess Charlotte's life is in immediate danger. Queen Isabella is planning to murder her, and she's using you to provide the means and cover story for that murder. Dr. Whitmore's face went pale, but he nodded gravely. I suspected as much. That's why I'm coming to you now. What can I do to help stop her? Marcus made a quick decision. First, I need you to continue acting normally around Queen Isabella. Don't let her suspect that you've figured out her plan. Second, I need copies of all the documentation she's asked you to create, including the falsified family medical history and the medication protocols. And third, Dr. Whitmore asked. Third, we need to set a trap. Marcus outlined the basics of a plan that had been forming in his mind since the meeting with Isabella. They needed to catch her in the act of attempting to murder Charlotte, with witnesses and evidence that couldn't be denied or covered up. It would be dangerous and would require perfect timing, but it might be their only chance to expose her crimes before she succeeded in eliminating Charlotte. Dr. Whitmore listened carefully, asking clarifying questions and suggesting modifications based on his medical expertise. Despite his nervousness, the elderly physician showed remarkable courage in agreeing to participate in what amounted to a sting operation against the most powerful person in the kingdom. Captain, Dr. Whitmore said as their meeting concluded, there's one more thing you should know. Queen Isabella has been meeting regularly with representatives from the neighboring kingdom of Drakmore. I've seen them in the palace late at night, and I've overheard conversations about territorial agreements and resource sharing. I believe she's planning to sell Valdoria's independence along with everything else. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Isabella wasn't just embezzling money and planning to murder Charlotte. She was preparing to hand Valdoria over to foreign control. The sale of royal lands to Drakmorian investors, the depletion of the kingdom's resources, and The elimination of the legitimate heir were all part of a comprehensive plan to transform Valdoria from an independent kingdom into a Drakmorian vassal state. Marcus left the meeting with Dr. Whitmore feeling both energized and terrified. They now had a clear picture of Isabella's complete plan, evidence of her crimes, and the beginnings of a strategy to stop her. But they also knew that time was running out. Isabella's meetings with Drakmorian representatives suggested that whatever timeline she was following was approaching its conclusion. That evening, Marcus called together his inner circle of trusted guards and Mrs. Hartwell for a strategy meeting. Charlotte, despite being only 12 years old, insisted on participating in the discussion about her own fate. "We have perhaps a week before Queen Isabella make her move," Marcus explained to the group. "She's getting impatient with the delays, and the pressure from her Drakmorian partners is probably increasing. Dr. Whitmore believes she'll try to stage Charlotte's cardiac emergency within the next few days." Mrs. Hartwell, who had been taking notes throughout Marcus's briefing, looked up with a determined expression. "Then, we need to be ready for her. What exactly do you have in mind?" Marcus spread out a detailed map of the palace on the table before them. "We're going to give Queen Isabella exactly what she wants. The perfect opportunity to murder Princess Charlotte. But when she takes that opportunity, we'll be ready for her." The plan was audacious and dangerous, but as Marcus outlined the details, he could see understanding and approval growing on the faces around the table. It would require courage, precise timing, and no small amount of luck. But it might be their only chance to save Charlotte, expose Isabella's treachery, and preserve Valdoria's independence. The real test of their resolve was about to begin. Part 4 of the trap was set for the Royal Summer Festival's opening ceremony, a grand event that would provide the perfect public stage for Isabella's final act. The festival was Valdoria's most important celebration, drawing nobles and dignitaries from across the kingdom and neighboring realms. It would be the ideal setting for a tragic accident to befall the young princess, with hundreds of witnesses to confirm the sudden and unavoidable nature of her death. Marcus and his team had spent 3 days meticulously planning every detail of their counteroperation. The key was allowing Isabella to believe she had the perfect opportunity while ensuring they could intervene at the crucial moment with undeniable evidence of her crimes. Dr. Whitmore played his role flawlessly, informing Isabella that he had detected minor cardiac irregularities during Charlotte's most recent examination and recommending that emergency cardiac medications be readily available during the stressful public ceremony. Isabella's eyes had lit up with barely concealed satisfaction as she agreed that such precautions were wise and necessary. The morning of the festival dawned clear and bright, with colorful banners streaming from every tower of the palace and the sound of musicians practicing in the courtyards below. Charlotte was scheduled to make a formal appearance at the opening ceremony, presenting the traditional blessing of the harvest while hundreds of nobles and dignitaries looked on from the Great Hall. Marcus positioned his trusted guards throughout the hall with careful precision. Sergeant Blackwood was stationed near the main entrance, ready to prevent anyone from leaving once events began unfolding. Corporal Reed and 2 others were positioned along the walls where they could observe everything while remaining inconspicuous. Lieutenant Morrison was assigned to stay close to Charlotte throughout the ceremony, ready to act on Marcus's signal. Mrs. Hartwell had the most dangerous role in their plan. She would be carrying a hidden recording device that Dr. Whitmore had obtained from his medical contacts, a new invention that could capture conversations on wax cylinders. Her job was to position herself where she could record Isabella's words and actions during the critical moments. Charlotte herself had insisted on understanding every aspect of the plan. Despite her youth, she showed remarkable composure as Marcus explained how she would need to act when Isabella made her move. "I understand, Captain Thornfield. When Queen Isabella tries to give me the injection, I need to appear to be having cardiac symptoms, but delay long enough for you to gather the evidence." The ceremony began with traditional pomp and pageantry. Isabella, dressed in regal purple silk and wearing the crown jewels, presided over the festivities with apparent maternal concern for her young charge. Charlotte, in a flowing white dress that symbolized the purity of the harvest blessing, performed her ceremonial duties with grace and dignity that impressed even the most critical observers. Marcus watched from his position near the royal dais, every sense alert for signs that Isabella was preparing to make her move. Dr. Whitmore stood nearby with his medical bag, containing both the legitimate emergency supplies he would normally carry and the lethal cardiac drugs Isabella had ordered him to prepare. The moment came during Charlotte's presentation of the harvest blessing. As she spoke the traditional words that had been recited by Valdorian royalty for centuries, Marcus saw Isabella make a subtle gesture to Dr. Whitmore. The physician nodded almost imperceptibly and began moving closer to the dais, his hand moving toward his medical bag. Charlotte was midway through the blessing when she suddenly placed her hand on her chest and swayed slightly. The movement was perfectly executed, subtle enough to appear genuine, but noticeable enough to prompt immediate concern from those watching. "Something's wrong," Isabella announced loudly, her voice carrying across the hall with practiced alarm. "Dr. Whitmore, quickly!" The physician rushed forward, playing his part in their counterplan perfectly. "Your Majesty, it appears Princess Charlotte may be experiencing the cardiac symptoms we discussed. I need to administer the emergency medication immediately." Isabella moved closer, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite hide the anticipation in her eyes. "Yes, of course, doctor. Do whatever is necessary to save her." This was the crucial moment. Dr. Whitmore reached into his bag and withdrew a syringe filled with clear liquid. To the observing crowd, it appeared to be emergency cardiac medication. In reality, it was a harmless saline solution that would have no effect on Charlotte's health, but would allow Isabella to believe her plan was succeeding. But Mrs. Hartwell, positioned strategically nearby with her hidden recording device, needed to capture Isabella's words clearly. The elderly governess stepped forward with apparent concern. "Your Majesty, shouldn't we summon additional physicians? This seems very serious." Isabella turned toward Mrs. Hartwell, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. "No, that won't be necessary. Dr. Whitmore's treatment will be quite final. Princess Charlotte won't need additional care after this." The words were spoken quietly, meant only for Mrs. Hartwell's ears, but the recording device captured them perfectly. More importantly, several of Marcus's position guards were close enough to hear the exchange clearly. Dr. Whitmore raised the syringe, preparing to administer the injection that Isabella believed would kill Charlotte within minutes. Charlotte continued her performance flawlessly, appearing weak and distressed but maintaining just enough awareness to follow the plan. That's when Marcus made his move. "Stop!" His voice rang out across the great hall with the authority of 15 years of military command. "By order of the Royal Guard, I command everyone to remain where they are." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs and confused questions as Marcus strode toward the royal dais, followed by his position guards who emerged from their stations with military precision. Isabella's face went white, then flushed with fury. "Captain Thornfield, what is the meaning of this outrage? Princess Charlotte needs immediate medical attention." "Princess Charlotte needs protection," Marcus replied firmly, "from the person who has been systematically poisoning her for months and who just ordered her murder." The accusation hit the assembled nobles like a thunderclap. Gasps and exclamations echoed throughout the hall as the implications of Marcus's words began to sink in. Isabella drew herself up to her full height, every inch the imperious queen regent. "How dare you make such accusations? I demand you arrest this man immediately for treason and interference with royal medical care." But Marcus was ready for her response. He gestured to Dr. Whitmore, who stepped forward with his medical bag open for all to see. "Your Majesty," Dr. Whitmore said in a voice that carried clearly across the silent hall, "this syringe contains a lethal dose of cardiac medication that would kill a healthy person within minutes. You specifically ordered me to prepare it and administer it to Princess Charlotte during this ceremony. The physician's words created an even greater stir among the witnesses. Several nobles began talking urgently among themselves, and Marcus could see the tide of opinion beginning to turn as people realized the gravity of what they were hearing. Isabella's composure finally cracked completely. That's absurd. Dr. Whitmore is clearly suffering from some form of mental breakdown. Princess Charlotte has a documented hereditary cardiac condition that requires emergency treatment. Really? Mrs. Hartwell stepped forward, holding the wax cylinder recording device for all to see. Then, perhaps Your Majesty could explain why you just told me that, Dr. Whitmore's treatment would be quite final, and that Princess Charlotte won't need additional care after this. The recording device was a new enough invention that many of the nobles weren't immediately familiar with its function, but Mrs. Hartwell's explanation of what it had captured sent another wave of shock through the assembly. Charlotte, who had been maintaining her performance of cardiac distress, suddenly stood up straight and healthy, demonstrating that her collapse had been staged. "I feel perfectly fine," she announced clearly. "I've been feeling fine ever since Captain Thornfield's guard started protecting my food and drinks from being poisoned." The word poison created the greatest reaction yet. Several nobles began shouting questions and demand for explanation while others called for immediate investigation. The carefully controlled ceremony had transformed into chaos, but it was chaos that worked in favor of justice rather than murder. Isabella made one final desperate attempt to regain control. This is all an elaborate deception designed to undermine the legitimate authority of the crown. Captain Thornfield has obviously manipulated Princess Charlotte and corrupted loyal servants in pursuit of his own treasonous ambitions. But Marcus was prepared for this accusation as well. He pulled out the financial documents that Charlotte had originally discovered, along with additional evidence that his investigation had uncovered over the past week. "Your Majesty," he said with calm authority, "these documents show systematic embezzlement of crown funds, unauthorized sale of royal properties to foreign investors, and secret agreements with representatives of Drakmore that amount to the sale of Valdoria's independence." He handed the documents to Lord Chancellor Edmund Rothwell, the senior member of the Royal Council who was present at the ceremony. Rothwell was a man in his 60s with a reputation for absolute integrity and careful legal analysis. His examination of the evidence would carry enormous weight with the other nobles. Lord Rothwell studied the papers with growing amazement and horror. These documents, if authentic, represent the most serious crimes possible against the crown and kingdom. The evidence suggests systematic treason on a scale I've never encountered. Isabella's face had gone from white to ashen gray as she realized that her carefully constructed plan was collapsing around her. The evidence was too overwhelming, the witnesses too numerous, and the accusations too specific to be dismissed or covered up. But she wasn't finished yet. In a move that caught everyone by surprise, Isabella suddenly pulled a concealed dagger from her dress and lunged toward Charlotte. "If I can't have this kingdom, no one will," she screamed, her mask of royal composure completely shattered. Lieutenant Morrison, who had been positioned specifically to protect Charlotte in such a scenario, intercepted Isabella's attack with reflexes honed by years of combat training. The dagger clattered harmlessly to the floor as Morrison subdued the would-be assassin with firm but appropriate force. The great hall exploded into complete pandemonium as nobles and dignitaries struggled to process what they had just witnessed. The Queen Regent of Eldoria had just attempted to murder the legitimate heir to the throne in front of hundreds of witnesses after being exposed as a traitor and embezzler. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos with military authority. "Lord Chancellor Rothwell, I formally request that you assume emergency authority over this situation pending a full investigation by the Royal Council." Rothwell nodded gravely. "Captain Thornfield, your request is granted. Queen Isabella, you are hereby under arrest for treason, attempted murder, embezzlement, and conspiracy against the crown." As Isabella was led away in chains, still screaming accusations and denials Charlotte stepped forward to address the shocked assembly. Despite being only 12 years old, she carried herself with the dignity and authority of a true queen. "My lords and ladies," she said in a clear voice that reached every corner of the hall, "today you have witnessed an attempt to steal not only my life, but the very soul of our kingdom. I pledge to you that justice will be done and that Valdoria will remain free and independent." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The assembled nobles, having witnessed undeniable proof of Isabella's treachery and Charlotte's courage, erupted in cheers and declarations of loyalty to the rightful heir. Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. They had succeeded beyond his wildest hopes, not only saving Charlotte's life, but exposing Isabella's crimes in such a public and undeniable way that no one could question the legitimacy of what had happened. But he also knew that their real work was just beginning. Isabella's conspiracy had tentacles that reached throughout the palace and possibly beyond Valdoria's borders. Rooting out all of her collaborators and reversing the damage she had done would take months or even years of careful investigation and reconstruction. As the immediate crisis subsided and order began to be restored to the Great Hall, Charlotte approached Marcus with the same serious expression she had worn throughout their dangerous game. "Captain Thornfield," she said formally, "I want to thank you for your loyalty and courage. You saved my life and our kingdom." Marcus bowed deeply. "Your Highness, I only did my duty as it was meant to be done, in service to the true crown and the people of Valdoria." Charlotte smiled for the first time that day. Looking briefly like the 12-year-old girl, she actually was beneath all the royal dignity. "Captain, I hope you'll continue to serve when I reach my majority and assume the throne officially. Valdoria needs people like you." "It would be my honor, Your Highness." As the day's events continued to unfold and the full scope of Isabella's crimes became clear, Marcus reflected on the choice he had made in Isabella's office just a week ago. He had chosen conscience over compliance, justice over orders, and the protection of the innocent over the convenience of the powerful. It had been the right choice, but it had also been the only choice a true guardian of the crown could make. Some lines could never be crossed, no matter who gave the orders to cross them. In the weeks following Isabella's arrest and the exposure of her conspiracy, Valdoria underwent a transformation that touched every level of society. The Royal Council, under Lord Chancellor Rothwell's careful guidance, launched comprehensive investigations into every aspect of Isabella's administration. What they discovered was even worse than Marcus had initially suspected. The financial crimes extended far beyond simple embezzlement. Isabella had systematically sold strategic resources, including mining rights, timber forests, and even military fortifications, to Drakmorian interests at prices far below their actual value. The proceeds had been divided between her personal accounts and payments to a network of collaborators throughout the kingdom who had helped facilitate her schemes. Dr. Whitmore's cooperation proved invaluable in uncovering the full scope of the poisoning campaign. Under careful questioning, he revealed that Isabella had been experimenting with various substances for months, trying to find the perfect combination that would weaken Charlotte gradually while avoiding detection. The nightshade had been just the latest in a series of attempts that had included other plant toxins and even traces of mercury. Perhaps most shocking of all was the discovery of Isabella's correspondence with Drakmorian officials. The letters, found hidden in secret compartments in her private chambers, revealed a plan that went far beyond personal enrichment. Isabella had agreed to marry Prince Victor of Drakmor and merge the two kingdoms under Drakmorian rule, with herself serving as a puppet queen until Charlotte's eventual elimination would make the arrangement permanent. The betrayal cut deep into the hearts of Valdorian citizens, many of whom had genuinely believed Isabella was protecting the kingdom during Charlotte's minority. When the full truth became public knowledge, the reaction was swift and decisive. Demonstrations of support for Charlotte erupted in towns and villages throughout the kingdom, with people demanding justice for those who had betrayed their trust. Marcus found himself in the unexpected position of being celebrated as a national hero, a role that made him deeply uncomfortable. He had simply done what his oath and conscience demanded, but the public saw him as the man who had saved both their beloved princess and their kingdom's independence. Songs were written about his courage, and mothers throughout Valdoria told their children stories about the loyal guard who chose right over expedient. "I don't deserve this attention," Marcus confided to Lieutenant Morrison during one of their daily briefings. "I was just doing my job." Morrison, who had been promoted to captain in recognition of his own role in the events, smiled at his former commander's discomfort. "Sir, sometimes doing your job properly is heroic enough." The investigation also revealed the extent to which Isabella had corrupted the palace staff and guard units. Nearly a dozen servants and guard were found to have been reporting Charlotte's activities to Isabella, while others had been bribed to look the other way during various aspects of the conspiracy. The betrayals were painful, but necessary to uncover, as they highlighted the importance of rebuilding the palace's security systems from the ground up. Mrs. Hartwell, meanwhile, had been appointed as Charlotte's official regent advisor, a position created specifically to ensure that the young princess had trusted guidance as she prepared to assume full royal authority. The elderly governess threw herself into the role with characteristic determination, organizing Charlotte's education to include not just traditional royal subjects, but also practical lessons in governance, economics, and leadership. "A queen must understand the lives of her people," Mrs. Hartwell insisted during one of Charlotte's lessons. "She must know how royal policies affect farmers and merchants and craftsmen, not just nobles and diplomats." Charlotte embraced these expanded studies with the same curiosity and compassion that had first alerted Isabella to her potential threat. She spent time in kitchens and workshops learning about the daily operations that kept the palace functioning. She studied agricultural reports and trade agreements, developing an understanding of how economic policies affected ordinary citizens. Most importantly, she began meeting regularly with representatives from different regions of the kingdom, listening to their concerns and learning about local challenges. The young princess also insisted on participating directly in the justice process for Isabella's collaborators. Under careful supervision from Lord Chancellor Rothwell and other royal council members, Charlotte observed the trials and heard the evidence against those who had betrayed the crown. It was a sobering education in the realities of power and corruption, but it also reinforced her determination to be a different kind of ruler. Isabella herself remained defiant throughout her trial, refusing to admit guilt and continuing to insist that her actions had been necessary to protect the kingdom from Charlotte's dangerous idealism. Her defense was that Charlotte's compassion and concern for common people would have weakened Valdoria and made it vulnerable to conquest by less benevolent neighbors. "You'll see," Isabella declared during her final statement to the court. "That child's soft heart will be the ruin of this kingdom. I was trying to prevent a disaster that would have cost thousands of lives." Lord Chancellor Rothwell, presiding over the trial, responded with the measured authority that had made him one of the kingdom's most respected jurists. "The evidence shows that your actions would have cost one life immediately and condemned our kingdom to foreign domination. The princess's compassion for her people is not weakness. It is the foundation of legitimate royal authority." Isabella was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Tower of Valdoria, the ancient fortress that had once protected the kingdom's first rulers. Her Drakmorian contacts were expelled from the kingdom and banned from ever returning, while their purchased properties were reclaimed by the crown and redistributed according to the kingdom's traditional laws. The trials and investigations took nearly 3 months to complete, during which Charlotte continued her education and gradually began taking on more official responsibilities. Marcus resumed his role as head of her security detail, but their relationship had evolved into something more like that of a trusted advisor and his young sovereign. "Captain Thornfield," Charlotte said during one of their planning meetings, "I've been thinking about what kind of queen I want to be when I officially assume the throne." Marcus looked up from the security reports he had been reviewing. What conclusions have you reached, Your Highness? I want to be the kind of ruler who earns loyalty through service rather than demanding it through fear. Isabella was right about one thing. My concern for common people will shape how I govern. But she was wrong to think that makes me weak. Charlotte's voice carried a maturity that continued to surprise Marcus. I think it makes me stronger because I'll have the genuine support of my people rather than just their grudging obedience. The wisdom in her words reminded Marcus why Isabella had been so threatened by Charlotte's potential. A ruler who genuinely cared about her people's welfare and had the intelligence to translate that caring into effective policy would indeed be a formidable leader. Isabella's attempt to eliminate that threat had only strengthened Charlotte's resolve to become exactly the kind of queen that threatened tyrants and corrupt officials. As the kingdom settled into its new normal, Marcus found himself reflecting often on the choices that had led to this outcome. The moment in Isabella's office when he had been ordered to restrict Charlotte's freedoms seemed like it had happened years ago rather than months. The man who had walked into that room would have struggled with the decision. The man who had walked out had been transformed by the clear moral lines that Isabella's corruption had revealed. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't stopped her? Morrison asked during one of their evening walks through the palace gardens. Marcus considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes. Isabella would have succeeded in murdering Charlotte, married Prince Victor of Drakmore, and turned Valdoria into a vassal state. Within a generation, our kingdom would have ceased to exist as an independent nation, and all because one person chose personal power over duty to the crown. That's the thing about loyalty, Marcus replied. It's easy to claim when there's no cost involved. The real test comes when choosing loyalty requires sacrifice. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Charlotte herself, who had taken to evening walks as a way of clearing her mind after long days of study and preparation for her future role. She was accompanied by 2 guards, but the security precautions were much more relaxed now that the immediate threats to her life had been eliminated. Captain Thornfield, Captain Morrison, she greeted them formally, then added with a smile, "May I join your walk? I find the gardens peaceful in the evening." As they strolled together through paths lined with roses and herbs, Charlotte shared her thoughts about the challenges facing the kingdom. The financial damage caused by Isabella's embezzlement would take years to fully repair. The relationships with neighboring kingdoms had been complicated by the discovery of Drakmore's involvement in the conspiracy. Most importantly, the trust between the crown and its people needed to be rebuilt through consistent demonstration of good governance and transparent leadership. "I know I'm young," Charlotte said as they paused beside a fountain that had been built by her great-grandfather, "but I feel ready to begin taking on real responsibilities. The trials taught me that delaying justice only makes problems worse." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Your Highness, if I may say so, the events of recent months have demonstrated that age is less important than character when it comes to leadership. You've shown courage, wisdom, and integrity under the most difficult circumstances imaginable." "I had good teachers," Charlotte replied with genuine gratitude. "Mrs. Hartwell showed me the importance of careful observation and patient planning. Dr. Whitmore demonstrated that conscience must sometimes overcome fear. And you taught me that true loyalty means protecting what's right rather than what's convenient." As their walk continued, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal recognition or reward. They had faced a challenge that threatened everything they held dear, and they had met that challenge successfully through courage, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to justice. The kingdom was safe, the rightful heir was protected, and the future looked brighter than it had in years. But perhaps most importantly, they had demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming power and apparent helplessness, ordinary people could make choices that changed the course of history. Marcus had been just one guard among many, Mrs. Hartwell just one governess among several, Dr. Whitmore just one physician in the palace. Yet their individual decisions to stand up for what was right had combined to defeat a conspiracy that had seemed unstoppable. "Your Highness, Marcus said as their evening walk neared its end. "What do you see as the most important lesson from everything that happened?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness she brought to all matters of governance. "I think the most important lesson is that power without compassion becomes tyranny, but compassion without courage becomes powerlessness." Isabella had power but no compassion, while many good people had compassion but were afraid to act on it. "We succeeded because we combined both." Her answer confirmed Marcus's belief that Valdoria's future was in capable hands. The young woman walking beside him would indeed become a formidable queen, one who could inspire loyalty through service rather than demanding it through fear. As they returned to the palace, the lights in the windows glowing warm and welcoming against the gathering darkness, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He had kept his oath, protected the innocent, and served justice. In a world where such outcomes were never guaranteed, that was perhaps the most anyone could hope for. The kingdom of Valdoria would endure, its independence preserved and its future bright. And somewhere in the Tower of Valdoria, Isabella would spend the rest of her life contemplating the difference between power seized and authority earned. The loyal guard had made his choice, and history would remember it as the moment when courage triumphed over corruption, when duty to truth overcame obedience to power, and when the simple words, "I quit," became a declaration of independence that saved the kingdom.